like all the way up to calculus, but I'm not certified to teach first grade math. That's weird how the certifications work. Like I'm not even like qualified to teach first grade, but I can teach all the way up to calculus.
We can't hear you, Lori.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Can y'all hear me now?
Yes,
We
now
can
we
hear
can.
you loud and clear. Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yay. All right, we're gonna get started because this is a 2-hour class. Next time y'all take this class, it will be CE. So yay, I'm so excited.
Yay.
All right, does everybody have a 1 to 4 in front of you? You may not have all the documents that I have, but the main thing is the 1 to 4. I don't know what I should be looking at, the TV or here. Can y'all see me on the TV?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. If I turn around, you'll see the side of me, right? Okay. All right. Y'all ready?
I got.
Yeah.
So is it just supposed to be 1 page?
Don't get it out of order. Just just keep it in order, and I'll tell you when to flip. Okay. Because if you do start separating it, you will get lost.
Okay.
All right. For all of you guys that are here, this is for you to take notes. So write on it so you'll have something to refer back to, right? So this is, I'm pretty much teaching on how to write a perfect offer with our brokerage requirements. Okay. So here we go. All right. The parties to the contract. The parties should always be, and I'm going to teach this class like we are representing the buyer. Okay. However, I want you also to take into perspective when an agent writes an offer on your listing, that you also implement what you learn as writing it as a buyer. Because you'll be able to go back to that listing agent and say, hey, this is not correct. I need you to correct it to our brokerage standards and just keeping everybody legal and clean. So the parties should always be who your buyer is on the 1 to 4. Okay. So if your buyer is little Johnny, that's all that goes under the buyer's name. Little Johnny comes and says, Leo, my wife is Sally Sue. We need to put her on the contract. You do not put Sally Sue on the contract unless she is on the pre-approval. Okay? If it's little L Johnny, you put little L Johnny. So whatever the pre-approval has, that is who your party is. Okay? It doesn't matter that they're married. It doesn't matter what little Johnny tells you. What matters is what is on the pre-approval, always. Legal description. Making sure that you put the proper legal description. Do not go what the listing agent has put on the MLS. Know that later.
Lori,
Yes.
I'm sorry. On the buyer, I had a question because I'm writing up an offer today and we're making an offer on a house that's being sold by an estate. Do I need to fill in the seller or do I leave that blank? What would I put if it's the seller's an estate?
You need to call the listing agent and ask them.
Okay. Sorry.
No, you're good. Ask questions. That's what this class is for. On the legal description, do not go off of what is on the MLS. Agents, unfortunately, don't always put the proper legal. So make sure you're going to the CAD to find out what that legal is, or you are going to Realist, which is in the MLS. Okay? One thing I want you guys to know is that the MLS is for informational purposes only. there is nothing binding in the MLS listing. Nothing. And I'll go over a little bit more of that as we get into the contract. If the legal is too long, there are very few cases, but there are some cases where the legal is just too long and it's not going to fit on page 1. You can carry that legal over to special provisions. That is about the only thing that can be written in special provisions. Okay? Improvements. The only thing that changed on the 1 to 4 is that they added generators. Generators are becoming more common, and so they have added that it is an improvement. And they're considering it permanently installed and a built-in. Okay? So make note of the generator, because if you go take a listing that has a generator, then you need to have that conversation with the seller to say, hey, generators are now considered an improvement. Are you taking it or leaving it? Okay. Accessories, we all know what that is. Exclusions. If there are no exclusions, then just put in A. Brokerage requirement for team and solo agents. There shall be no blank spaces in the contract. It either is applicable or it is not applicable. So if there are no exclusions, then you would put in A in the exclusions. Okay? Yes.
For the exclusions on the improvement, you have that conversation with your seller about the generator. That's where, I mean, you would put it on there, right?
Correct.
Taking the,
Correct.
okay.
Yes. Anything that the seller is excluding in the sale will go there. Listen, and just because the MLS says that it is excluded does not mean it's excluded. MLS may show refrigerator is excluded, patio furniture is excluded, but you go and you show your client the property and your client's like, I want that refrigerator. You're going to write the offer that the refrigerator is going to be included on a non-realty. Okay? So just because the MLS says that none of this stuff is staying does not mean that you cannot negotiate it for your client. Okay? But if it's really going to be excluded, that's where you would put it. All right. Paragraph 3 of the contract is your sales price. Okay? Third-party financing. If there is a third-party financing, that you're going to check that box, and then you're going to put what the pre-approval says. You're not going to guess any numbers, right? If you're not sure of anything, especially when it comes to the numbers, you need to be calling the lender to find out what these numbers are. There's down payment assistance. Don't always assume, because don't always assume that if it's FHA, that it's automatically a 3.5 down payment. That's not the case. Get those numbers from your lender so that paragraph 3 matches what the pre-approval is and what the lender is expecting. If you look over, the next page is the third-party financing. A couple of years ago, they changed this third-party financing, making sure that if it's conventional, you check conventional. If it's FHA, you're checking box C. And if it's a VA, you're checking box D. I can't tell you how many times agents get confused with B and D. Okay? If it's a traditional VA loan, box D is going to be checked, not the Texas Veterans Land Board loan. Okay? So just make sure you're checking those boxes. Making sure you know the interest rate. There are lenders that will give us a pre-approval for our buyer, but they sometimes don't put the interest rate on the pre-approval. Don't guess the interest rate. Call the lender, ask them, hey, I need the interest rate for the third-party financing. Can you tell me what that is? And they're going to tell you 6.75, 6.35, whatever it is. Make sure that you are putting that right interest rate. Paragraph G, they added this. This was the new addition, other financing. Other financing is hard money lending. So make sure that if your client, if you're working with an investor and they're like, oh, we're paying cash for it, making sure that they're actually paying cash for it, that they're using their cash. Asking the lender, hey, Leo, I hear you say cash, but are you really using your cash or are you using a hard money lender? Okay. If they say hard money lender, it is not cash. So you are going to be checking that third party financing box on page 1, and then you're going to be checking box G under the third party financing. Finding out who that hard money lender is and making sure you have their terms written in here. So it's going to entail you also talking to the third party lender. I mean, the hard money financing company. Okay? Is everybody clear on that? I just had a friend of mine who works at Stewart Title. She had a file and it was closing yesterday. It was cash. Agent wrote it up as cash. No third party financing. Getting close to the closing. She reaches out to the buyer, says, hey, I need your cashier's check and the amount of this, blah, blah, blah. Buyer says, oh, it's not my money. I have a hard money lender. So she was like, what the hell, right? So she had to find out who's the hard money lender, get their information. So needless to say, they didn't close yesterday. So just make sure that when they say cash, they really mean cash, which is why also our brokerage requires you to have, when you're representing a buyer, proof of funds, whether it's through a lender or proof of funds through their bank if they're paying cash. Okay? Don't always just go on somebody's word. Page 2 of the contract of the third party financing, box A, our standard in the industry is 21. Again, call the lender and ask the lender, hey, which our 3 lender partners, it's always less than 21. If you're using Jennifer, Seth, or Al, it's usually less than 21. This is a part in the offer that is could make or break the difference in a multiple offer. One of the items that is a great negotiating. So if we can get that 21 days down to 10 or 7 or 14, that's less days. And the seller and the listing agent are looking at that and they're like, okay, well, that's good. You know, this one might have 30, this one might have 21, this one has 10. So just get with the lender, ask them, hey, can I put less days for the buyer approval? And making sure that on box in paragraph 4, that if it's an FHA or a VA, that you are putting, let me ask you, are we putting the finance price there or are we putting the offer price there? Who can tell me?
Sales price.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but the sales price there. One thing too is getting in the practice of making sure that your numerical values are correct. I will return your offer for corrections, right? So if it's 250,000, the offer is 250,000. That it's 250,000. This is the correct way. This is not. Okay? Commas and decimals matter. So make sure that you are properly placing the numerical values on all of where they apply.
Lori, I didn't hear the answer to that question. Is it the finance amount or sales price? Sales price, correct? Is that what you said?
Correct. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. All right. We are on page 2 of the contract now. Earnest money and termination. The earnest money is delivered to, it says escrow agent, but who really is the escrow agent?
Title company. The name of
Title.
Yes, absolutely. It's not the title company dash Leo Rosales. It's not Leo Rosales. It's just the title company. So if you get an offer on your listing and the buyer's agent writes something other than the title company name, you are going to ask them to correct that.
So
Okay?
you put title company and the name, it has to get that corrected.
Yes. Yes. It's only title company. I had asked and wrote to the board to please change it to title company. I'm hoping one day they'll listen to me. At is the address, then the earnest money amount and the option fee amount. Okay. Under 5A1, make sure you're putting 0.00 and 0 days after the effective date of the contract if it does not apply. Okay. One of the things that they changed in this new contract effective July 1 is legal holiday and means a legal holiday described in section of the Texas Government Code. If you flip your page, I've listed all the legal holidays. Okay. New Year's Day, Martin Luther King, President's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Veterans Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas. Those are our national holidays. I just threw the state holidays in there. They don't really matter, but they do matter if your option period or your earnest money delivery lands on one of those days, because you have till the next one too. Okay. Making sure that the delivery of the option fee and the earnest money are delivered timely. Time is of the essence. Who can tell me what happens if our buyers do not timely deliver earnest money or option fee?
The contract would be-
Huh? She said terminated.
And would the listing, the seller retain the earnest money or no? Because
It wasn't timely delivered, so there is no earnest money. They didn't timely, the buyer did not timely deliver within the 3 days. Carlos, do you know?
Ma'am, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about it.
It's okay. Does anybody in Zoom land know?
I guess terminated. The contract isn't valid anymore.
No, I don't think it's terminated. I just don't think you get the option.
You're close, Mike. You're close. So the contract is not terminated. You are still in contract. The buyer is still in contract. Okay. Seller now has the option to terminate if they so choose. Okay. The buyer, because they did not timely deliver their option fee, they no longer have an option. So
Hey, I got a real life story on this one real quick, Lori. We were buying a home. We gave our agent the option check. The check fell between her seat and her car. She didn't get it there in the 3 days. We decided to terminate and they wouldn't let us out, and they were going to keep our option or our earnest money. And then our agent, well, that wasn't on us as the buyer. So our agent had to reimburse us the earnest money. that we put forth towards that because it was her fault because she lost our check and didn't get it there in time.
And this is why agents are no longer because back in the old day, we would get the checks and we would go escrow for our clients. Now the buyers escrow directly with the title company because of instances like that. So just make sure when you are a buyer's agent that you are making sure your clients deliver timely. And when you are sitting with your buyers and having the buyer consultation with your buyers, that you're explaining this, because it could be detrimental if they don't timely deliver, right? Now, on the flip side, if the buyer does not timely deliver, we know what the seller can do, right? If the seller does not perform and notify that they are terminating the contract, the buyer can still go deliver after the third day and still have their option and have their earnest money protected for that option period. Okay? If the buyer does not timely deliver in the first 3 days that they are required to in the contract, and the seller does not exercise their option to terminate, the buyer can still deliver on day 4, 5, 6 and still have their option period and still have their earnest money protected. Okay? The only time it becomes a problem is when the seller makes it a problem. Okay?
If the seller makes it a problem, to your point, they lose not the earnest money, you said the option money, correct?
No, nothing's been paid.
Well,
All the seller is doing is terminate.
determined, okay. And
Yes.
he's not obligated, no one's obligated to still hand over the option.
The seller can still exercise under specific performance for it. Because remember, there's nothing delivered. So
Right.
there's nothing,
Right. He had.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But the seller can still terminate and sue for specific performance. Okay? Failure to timely deliver earnest money. If the buyer fails to deliver the earnest money within the time period, seller may terminate this contract and exercise seller's remedies under paragraph 15, which paragraph 15 is specific performance. And if they fail to deliver the option fee, if no dollar amount is stated as the option, the buyer fails to deliver, the buyer shall not have the unrestricted right to terminate the contract under this paragraph. Okay? Title policy, and we're on paragraph 6 now. Don't get the pages out of order because then you will be totally confused. Okay? We are right. You need another copy?
Yeah, I can make one though.
All right.
Or do I can print one?
We're gonna have to use this one. All right, title policy and survey. Let's talk about survey, okay? I'm not telling you guys not to use an existing survey for your buyer. And in fact, anything I teach in this class, when I suggest something, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your business. I'm just trying to teach you from experiences and best practices that are going to protect you and your buyer. Okay. I, for one, will always let my buyer know it's in their best interest to get a new survey and not to use an existing survey. I tell them that why? Because their approval already includes a new survey. So when they get their numbers from their lender is already factoring in the cost of a new survey. It's also factoring in the cost of the appraisal. So I always strongly suggest, even if there is an existing survey, I'm going to strongly suggest that you just get a new one. However, it is up to you, Mr. Buyer. If you want to use the existing survey, we can use the existing survey. However, if we do, we are going to write in the contract that any shortages, whatever, will be amended, and it will be a cost to you. So if you look at under paragraph 6, subparagraph A, where it says will not be amended and will be amended. Can anybody tell me what that paragraph, that subparagraph A means? Like, explain it to me. Like, if I was your buyer, how would you explain that to me? Anybody in Zoom land?
Are you asking for the entire A or just that little subsection 8, 1 and 2? You
I'm
want A?
asking for subparagraph 8, where it says will or will not be amended.
Yeah, so that means like if there's a problem with the survey and they need to do a new one, like the shortages, who's going to be responsible for that? I think you had told us before, Lori, that it's best to put the buyer because it's really not like you said, it's already factored into their cost already, and I think it just makes things easier. Something along those lines.
You're close. It's important that you guys really know what these contracts mean so you can be having these conversations with your clients. I cannot tell you how many contracts I see come across my desk, and even agents from our office when they're representing the buyer, that the box will not be amended is checked. And it's like, oh, you're not protecting your buyer when you are checking that box. Okay? And if you're just checking that box because you don't know what it means, you are not giving your client any justice. Okay? So I'm telling you, when you are a buyer's agent and you are representing the buyer, that you always check the box that it will be amended. Always. That is, when you check the box that it will be amended, you are saying that the buyer is asking the title company to insure them against any survey related problems. When you check that that box will be amended, I'm going to give you a scenario. A buyer buys a house. 5 years later down the road, the neighbor comes in and says, hey, your fence is encroaching my property, and I believe your fence is 6 feet down my property line. And the buyer says, no, I bought this house. Title policy was clear. Survey was clear. There's nothing wrong. Then we find out that there is something wrong, right? If you checked that the box, if you check the box will not be amended, your buyer has no protection. That means the title policy deleted the survey's exception. Okay. So the buyer, when you check the box that it will be amended, the buyer does have title insurance to cover that boundary issue.
I miss, when is the box? They will check. I still.
It's paragraph 6, subparagraph 8.
I don't think you're on the.
Yeah, I don't think so. Survey, but.
Paragraph 6, subparagraph 8, will or will not. If you are a buyer's agent, police check will be amended. Having the conversation with your buyer and letting them know why you strongly suggest that that box be protected, be checked. Okay? I always explain it to my clients that it is an extra added layer of protection for them, right? The cost of that is, example, on a $250,000 house, it's going to cost your buyer $76.10. So I asked my buyer, is it worth $76.10 to have any issues protected and for you to have the extra title policy insurance coverage for any issues that could arise?
For how long? How long does that last?
Forever.
And Lori, we're checking, like the expense of the buyer.
Yes.
Okay.
I always put it back on my buyer. You can ask the seller to pay for it. And if the seller says no, you're having that conversation with your buyer in the upfront, and you can tell them, hey, Mr. Buyer, we can ask the seller to pay for this. If they come back and say they won't pay for it, we're just going to check the box that you are. But as a buyer's agent, you should never, ever, ever check that it will not be amended. Okay? Always tell them, think of it like buying car insurance, right? You're just adding just a little extra coverage on that title policy. All right? Any questions on that?
So what about 6A title?
Yeah, we skipped over that.
What did we skip over?
6A.
Or the seller shall
No, we
purchase-
didn't skip over that. I said we should check box C, that the buyer will always get a new survey. They can use an existing survey, but we always want to tell the buyer to get their own survey. Is that where we're at?
No,
No.
6A.
6A.
The title policy. Was it the seller or buyer's expense?
Oh, the title policy. I'm sorry. I did totally just keep over that. If you're a buyer's agent, you always ask the seller to pay for the title policy, because the seller is the one that is providing clear title. No encumbrances, no liens, none of that. So always ask the seller to pay for that. Okay?
That's
Sorry.
That's a custom.
Yeah, that's just custom in the industry. Back in COVID, that was an item that was negotiated, and the buyers were like, I'll pay for the title policy, because it was just one of those things where the demand of the market. All right. Is that page 2? I'm telling y'all, don't click out of order. Y'all are gonna get lost, and I'm lost.
So I think
Uh,
we did it-
Now I'm on page 3.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like 3, right?
Yeah, we're on page 3 of the 1 to 4 under the survey. Survey, I think I just kind of hit that home going into the survey with that paragraph C. Again, just always having the conversation with your buyer and check box 2 that the buyer is going to obtain a new survey. I just think it's best practice and it's clean for your buyer. Your buyer has their own new survey. Now, again, this is you having a conversation with the lender. Sometimes the closing costs are, tight. They're close to their debt to income ratio is high, and the lender tells you, man, try to negotiate as much as you can. And there is an existing survey. Like, just having those conversations with your client. And if there's an existing survey, use it. You never want to force the issue of, no, Mr. Buyer, you've got to get a new survey. Like, if it's going to save them money, save your client money. But again, the new survey is already included. But again, it's just having those conversations. Okay.
What would we put for within how many days?
I normally put 21, because the survey is title company. orders the survey, and the survey usually doesn't get ordered till probably those last 10 days before it closes. You're on the team. So Chelsea is making sure that the title company has ordered the survey, letting the title company know, hey, we're coming up on our 21 days. Has the survey been ordered? Because we never want to be out of contract either.
And is that price due up front or at closing?
The survey is due at closing. Yep.
But no less than 15 days would be right.
Yeah, definitely. Objections. We normally put 3 to 5 days. You don't need any more than that on objections. In fact, you don't want more than 3 to 5 days. Paragraph E2, making sure that if it is located in a property owners association, that you're checking that appropriate box, right? Anything that is bolded or outlined in a contract, I would strongly suggest you read it and know what it means. It's bolded and underlined for a reason, okay? So making sure that you check the appropriate box. Again, this 1 to 4 is not for a condominium. The condominium has its own 1 to 4, okay? So making sure that you understand that difference. Okay, so yes, if it is, you're going to check it. If it's not, you're going to check that too. The next page, we're going to go down, which is page 4 of the contract. I am not going to go through this entire contract. I challenge you guys to read this contract, know it in and out, know what every paragraph means. If you do not know the 1 to 4 like you know your ABCs, you're not doing yourself or your client any justice. So read it till you're bored. I actually am the total opposite. I love the contract. Like, I can recite it. I know it like the back of my hand, and I want you all to know that as well. It makes the conversation so much easier with your client when you're able to just go through it and just say it. And plus, it gives them the confidence and the trust by being in business with you. Okay, so I'm not going to go over all the things that don't require anything to fill in. Paragraph 7, they changed this in the new contract effective July 1. All the seller's disclosure notices were updated. So if you will, I think it's page, split your contract for page 4. I'm going to come back to page 5. But I want to go over the seller's disclosure notices. Actually, let's go over page 5 first. We'll come back to that. So 4 is your seller's disclosure notice. I'm going to talk about that. So seller's disclosure notice as a buyer. Again, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your business. I personally will not go show a property that I do not have a seller's disclosure notice to give to my client. I just won't. I tell my buyers that up front. It doesn't do you or your client any justice to go run out and show a property that you can't give your client the seller's disclosure notice so that they can review it, because that seller's disclosure notice tells them a lot. I learned the hard way. I went out and showed a client. They fell in love with the home, wrote the offer that I would get the seller's disclosure notice 3 days after we went under contract. Clients delivered earnest money, all the good things. Get the seller's disclosure notice to find out that the house had been flooded and 4 feet of sheetrock had to be tore out throughout the whole house. And my clients were like, we don't want this house anymore. And so it pained me because they really loved the house, and I feel like I didn't do them any justice by not doing my due diligence of getting that information, because had I had that seller's disclosure notice upon going to show them, they would have seen that, and we probably wouldn't have gone to look at the house because they would have already had their radars up, and it was time. Then we had to wait for their earnest money to get released back to them, and it was just a hot ass mess. So at that point, I was like, if I don't have a seller's disclosure notice to give to my buyers, I'm not going to show the property. However, I am exhausting every option I can to get that seller's disclosure notice for my client. I'm calling the agent, I'm emailing them, I'm texting them, hey, I want to go show 123 Main Street. I don't see the seller's disclosure notice. We're going to go look at a few houses. If you can get it sent to me, I'll get it scheduled. Okay. And
Laura,
yeah,
do you make an exception for estates because they're not required to have one?
yes. If they want to go see a house, that is an estate. I mean, they already know that there's not going to be one. Okay. So I lost my train of thought. Seller's disclosure, making sure you get it. Oh, that's what I was going to say. When I'm showing my clients, I send them the seller's disclosure notice for every house we're going to go see before we go see it. I'm asking them, Leo, is there anything that you see on that seller's disclosure notice that would change your mind in wanting to go see this house? By me asking that specific question, it kind of obligates the buyer to look at it and say, oh, okay, no, this house, the roof is 18 years old. I don't want this old roof, you know? And you, as the buyer's agent, looking at that seller's disclosure notice to point out those obvious things. Because sometimes buyers, you know, they're just not as educated as we are. So if we see something on that seller's disclosure notice, we can immediately bring it to their attention, say, hey, Leo, just want you to know, look, this roof is 18 years old. So when we go look at it, we need to really look at the condition and kind of look and see. So it kind of gives them an eye opener of what we're headed for. Okay. Always use the long form with, no, I'm talking listings. Never mind. It doesn't matter what seller's disclosure notice you get. There's a short form and a long form, right? When you take a listing, since I said this, when you take a listing, use the long form. Okay. You can't make your seller use the long form, but the long form is, it discloses a whole lot more than the short form. Okay. So that's just brokerage standard. Just make sure you're using the long form. When you're a buyer's agent, you're going to use what the listing agent gives you. They added a new disclosure, which is the seller's disclosure about groundwater and surface water rights. Okay. If it does not apply, making sure that you are checking box 3 under that. Okay. Is there a water well? That's going to be your first sign whether that needs to be used or not. Is property in the groundwater district?
I have no idea where we are.
You're on page 5. Page 5. Okay. This seller's disclosure about the groundwater and surface water rights came from the Sunset Advisory Committee. So if you want to know what this means, go Google Sunset Advisory Committee and get educated. Okay. It has to do with the surface water and the groundwater on the property, and if there's water wells. Okay. On the So past the seller's disclosure notice, now understanding repairs of the property, understanding what lender required repairs are and the completion of repairs. We're still on page 5. Lender required repairs, back a long time ago, the only person that could do the lender required repairs was the seller. Now the buyer can complete any lender required repairs with the permission of the seller. Okay, so if a lender says,
It has to be done prior to closing.
yes. If the lender says that the rotted wood, around the fascia of the back right-hand corner of the house needs to be replaced, and you ask for that in negotiations of repair, and the seller says, I'm not repairing that. If the buyer really wants to move forward, then the buyer can pay for it. So it's kind of like I liked it when the seller was required, but then when I'm representing the seller, I'm like, well, if the buyer wants it done, then the buyer can pay for it, right? So it's like it's a catch-22, depends on who you're representing. But the fact that the seller is no longer required just them to repair it and the buyer has the opportunity to repair it is also great. The completion of the repairs, I like when they changed this in the contract 2 years ago too, because before we would have to say any repairs, like repairs to be completed by a licensed HVA contractor on or before closing, and provide receipts. Like, it was just so unnecessary. Now they changed subparagraph F to say that the seller is obligated to complete the repairs with licensed professionals. It has to be completed before closing, and they have to provide receipts and warranties. So you no longer have to put that extra verbiage in the repair amendment. Okay? We are going to move, if you'll look at the next page, is the seller's disclosure notices. And so I want to go through these. The first one is the long form. They added on page 1 to say cooktop, range, and stove. Okay? So they added that. On page 2, they added solar panels at the top. Are there solar panels on the property, right? On page 3 of the long form, they added, if you look, you go down under condition, they added a private road on or adjoining the property that a buyer will be financially responsible for maintaining. They added the ASR or the concrete cancer. They added subsurface structure or pits, underground storage tanks, above ground storage tanks, above ground storage tanks on the property that hold 500 gallons or more, and conservation easements. Okay. And they no longer have, if you notice on, on page 1, like it used to have unknown. Now you can't say it's unknown. It's either yes or no. Okay. They also added, if you look at the asterisks, it tells you if that part that they added has an asterisk, what that asterisk means underneath it. Okay. Under section 5, they added, you, seller, have been unable to insure the property for any reason. That's a huge one. Especially when they remapped all the properties and the flood zones changed for a lot of the properties that used to not be in a required flood zone that are now in a required flood zone. Like, some underwriters just couldn't even write in some of those areas anymore. So they're asking that specific question to the seller. Under section 6, they added this specific question. Have you, the seller, ever filed a claim for any damage to the property with any insurance provider? This includes, but is not limited to, claims filed with the National Flood Insurance Program. Notice that all these changes revolve around flood, right? So it's asking that seller that new specific, very outlined question. Page 4 of the long seller disclosure, under section 9, it says, have you, seller, ever received assistance from FEMA or the U.S. Small Business Administration, the SBA, for flood damage to the property? So that specific question was added. Under page 5, they added under section 10, they specifically say now, have any death on the property except for those deaths caused by natural causes, suicide, or accident unrelated to the condition of the property. They didn't have that there. So now we know, your seller knows, okay, if it was due to natural causes, suicide, or an accident, unrelated accident due to the property, that they don't have to answer that. They can put no. Then the last one, it says any portion of the property that is located in a underground conservation district or subsidence district. It's either yes or no. Okay. And then page 6. This is so important. At section 11, you remember on the old seller's disclosure notice, it would just ask the question, have you, the seller, ever received an inspection report within the last 4 years? Yes or no. If it was yes, who it was. Now it specifically says, within the last 4 years, have you, seller, received any written inspection reports or evaluations of the property prepared by persons who regularly provide such inspections or evaluations and who are licensed, certified, or otherwise legally authorized to perform them, including but not limited to general home, roof, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, structural foundation, pool, spa, mold, termite, or other wood-destroying insect, environmental, or other specialized inspections? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, you have to attach the copies. I'll give you.
Would that include appraisers in that section, Lori, or just inspectors?
No. This doesn't have anything to do with appraisal. I'll give you an example. I have a listing. It went under contract. We got the repair negotiations. The buyer asked for foundation evaluation. They asked for HVAC evaluation. They asked for plumbing, and roof. My client agreed to all of it. They terminated. Even after we got through repairs, they were happy. We had asked the buyer to ask for all this. My seller was like, I'm going to pay for it because I'm either going to have to pay for it now, I'll pay or pay for it later. Let me just do everything they want. We have a willing, able Approved buyer, they did it. Buyer terminates, buyer lost earnest money and option fee, right? But now my seller has a foundation report, they have a roof report, they have a plumbing report, like they have all this stuff. So now we have to update our seller's disclosure notice and attach all of those reports to the seller's disclosure notice. Okay. And my seller wanted the inspection report. So now we have an inspection report. So we have to update. We had to update everything. So before it was just, if you got an inspection report, that's all you had to do. But now, if you go get all these reports from all these licensed people, now you have to attach it to your seller's disclosure notice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, how long is that good for? For example, like.
4 years.
For 4 years.
That's right here.
All right.
4 years.
So your seller could say, hey, you know what, I'm taking it off the market next year, do that, those are still good. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Hmm. Any questions on that? Because that's kind of huge, right? And it says, and you see it in bold, under Texas law, you are required to disclose all known material facts, defects, needed repairs, or adverse conditions affecting the property. Failure to disclose known material information about the property may result in legal liability.
So if they have the AC service once a year, like they have to provide that. If there's something wrong with it, they're just servicing it, they have to provide that.
What do you think? What do you think if you were representing the seller based on what we just learned and read? What do you think that you would strongly suggest to your seller?
To provide the receipt.
Mm-hmm. Remember, disclose, disclose, disclose. So I will give you another example. An agent in our office sold a property, and after the first week, her client moved in to the property, the house flooded. When we had that first bad rain, house flooded, water literally in the floor of living room of her house. Client called the agent. Agent said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Agent, the client knew that it was in a flood zone. She got flood insurance. She got all this stuff, right? What she didn't know was that the house flooded prior, because the seller that she bought the house from, on his seller's disclosure notice, where it asked, has the house ever flooded? He answered no. Okay. So I tell this agent, let's pull the seller's disclosure notice from when he bought it. So we pulled the seller's disclosure notice from when he bought it 2 years ago. And that seller's disclosure notice disclosed that the house had been flooded twice. So he failed to disclose what he knew. Now, had the house flooded while he owned the property? No. But that's not what the question is on the seller's disclosure notice. It don't say, while you lived in this house, did the house flood? It says, has the property ever flooded? And he answered no. When he clearly signed the seller's disclosure notice when he bought it, that it had flooded twice. It's still ongoing. We gave the client the information, and the client is getting an attorney, and we're out of it until we're not out of it, right? So always tell your sellers, disclose, 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 right? And one thing that I learned is I'm gonna make sure that I'm checking the seller's disclosure notice on the property prior to my client owning it or whatever, to make sure that what he knew matches what he's disclosing. Okay. And then page 7. Page 7 is just blank. I will tell you, I'm going to speak from a seller. We're representing sellers. Okay. If you are on the team, which all of you are, yes, all of you are on the team. Chin will not you. You're not on the team. So everybody that's on the team, Chin will not go live unless the seller's disclosure notice is she has it when it's ready to go live with photos and videos. If you are an independent agent, you should be practicing the same thing. You should not go live on your listings unless you have the seller's disclosure notice. Pressure your clients to get it. This is an important document that can make or break a deal or make or break an agent wanting to write an offer on your property, right? So just make sure that if you go on a listing appointment, you are letting your clients know how important this document is and how important it is for them to fill it out timely and get it back to us, because the last thing you want is for the seller's disclosure notice to hold up your listing going live. Okay. The next one is the short form, and they pretty much just threw in what we talked about. But it's only 4 pages, right? So this is why we love the long form. It's a lot more work for your clients to fill out. But the short form is just that. It's a short form. I call it the lazy form.
If we only get the short form from our seller, we'll tend to still put it live?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still tell us this.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? Some sellers know. Some sellers are like, I don't want to fill out that long form. I just want to fill out the short form. And then I'm having a conversation. Well, why is it that you want to fill out the short form and not the long form? Because the long form is protecting you more as a seller, and it also discloses a lot more information for the buyer. And then
the long one was required. No?
Huh?
I thought the long one was required.
It's highly, yes, we want you to be using the long form, but if the seller says, I don't want to fill out the long form, I only want to fill out the short form, you're not going to say, no, you have to fill this out. You're just going to have a conversation, get down to the real reason why they don't want to fill out the long form. Maybe they know something and they don't want to disclose it. And then that should be your radars to dig deeper, ask more questions why they don't want that, right?
A good buyer's agent will call the seller's agent to ask questions that are not on here, like, you know, so that's another thing. I've had that happen. And then you have to then ask your seller, like, hey, did this happen?
Yeah.
They still have to end up telling you anyway.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you might as well get this thing done.
Get it done, right? I did put the seller's disclosure notice about groundwater and water rights in here. So if you guys want to take time to read it, that's it. Okay. Going from page 5 of the contract to page 6, paragraph 8, broker or sales agent disclosure. This is where you are going to disclose if you are related to the buyer or seller or have an interest in the transaction. Disclose, disclose, disclose. Okay. My sister's also a real estate agent, and we have done a few deals together. Not, you know, it just happened that way. We didn't have to disclose we're sisters, but we did. Right? Buyer agent, seller agent are sisters. Just for disclosure. You don't have to disclose buyer is my cousin. You know, the reason why we disclosed it is because we're both real estate license. We were both in the same brokerage. And so it was an intermediary, and we wanted all the parties to know we're sisters so that nothing comes up later, you know? But if you're a buyer and also a real estate agent, you're going to disclose. Like I'll use Jeanette as an example, Ozzy as an example, who buy property. Buyer is a licensed Texas real estate agent. Okay. Julia, who is with Matchmade, she does our wholesale deals. Julia is also a licensed real estate agent in the state of Texas and is a principal in Matchmade. Like disclosing all of the relationship. Okay, so that you would do that there in paragraph 8. All right, paragraph 12. Well, okay, I don't know why I'm skipping all this. Paragraph 9 is the closing date. Don't guess the closing date. Don't guess, oh, well, we're going under contract on August 1st. Closing is going to be September 1st. Don't guess the date. Call the lender.
That's Sunday.
Yes.
Okay.
Call the lender. Ask the lender, when can we close this? Can we close this in less than 30 days? Yes. Go ahead and put this on the contract. To Sandra's comment, making sure that the closing date does not fall on the weekend or a holiday. Nobody wants to be negotiating repairs on a Saturday at 2 o'clock like I was 3 weeks ago because I didn't pay attention to the day that the option period ended. Right? That's another thing. Making sure your option ends on the weekday, not the weekend or a holiday. There's nothing more painful than having to negotiate with an agent who's out of town on vacation on a Saturday afternoon before 5 o'clock. So just pay attention to those dates, and it also helps your transaction manager if you have one. Closing date, never close on a Friday. Shit hits the fan on a Friday, and then your clients are stuck homeless because they can't close on a Friday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays are the best days. Thursday is still good, but not on a Friday. Okay? And making sure it's not on a holiday. Possession. Understanding what possession is upon closing and funding, or if there's a lease back. I am not a fan of lease backs. And in fact, if we have an offer come through our office, I'm talking to the agent, why do we have a lease back? I will tell you why I do not like the lease backs, because after the property closes, we are done as agents. So if there is a lease back and the tenant doesn't move out on time, there is nothing we can do to help. They now become a tenant at sufferance, and now it's the seller/landlord's responsibility to get them out, to go file the eviction, to go do all the things. So
I mean, they probably, you can get a fair deposit too, right? Just like a normal tenant.
yeah, you should get a deposit. You should get a deposit, and you should get per diem. You should never negotiate that, especially if you're representing the seller who is going to become the landlord, right?
Yeah.
So yes,
The
you
buyer
should.
is the buyer.
But the deposit is still not, if they have to go evict them because they haven't moved out when they're supposed to move out, or if they trash the property, so for me, I'm avoiding a lease back at all possible things. We're either going to extend the closing so that it works for both parties. There's nothing more satisfying the knowing that everybody's going to close at the same time. It's going to be a clean transfer of possession. Buyers can move in, sellers move out, whatever. Okay. So that's possession. Special provisions, nothing, absolutely nothing, nothing shall be written in special provisions at all, period. Unless the legal is as long and you need more space for the legal, then you can carry it over to special provisions. Or if there is a clause that the attorney has drawn up to put in special provisions. So if you get an offer on your listing and there's a huge paragraph written in special provisions, you're going back to the buyer's agents to say, hey, does the buyer's attorney draw what's up in special provisions? If they say no, then you say, okay, great. I'm going to kindly ask you to remove the verbiage from special provisions.
Or what if a buyer says, oh, house must be professionally cleaned before closing?
Where does that go? Yes, it does not go into special provision. It goes under paragraph 7 under property condition, where it says buyer will purchase the home with all of this done. Okay, does not go in special provisions. Nothing, absolutely nothing goes in special provisions. We're practicing law when it comes to that, and we can't have that. All right, paragraph 12 is a biggie. This was one of the biggest changes in the 1 to 4. So we all know that the compensation agreement between broker no longer exists, right? Everybody knew that? Yeah. Okay, there's no more compensation agreement between brokers. It goes in paragraph 12. Okay. Paragraph 12, the first space, that is for seller concessions. Okay. So if you're asking for seller concessions for your buyer, you're going to put your seller concessions there. Now, your compensation goes in paragraph 12, subparagraph B. There's no more reason to call the agent and say, are you paying compensation on this listing? No reason to ask that question. Write your compensation in the offer. It's there now. Okay. So you're writing your compensation under subparagraph B1. Seller will pay. You're going to check if it's a flat fee or if it's a percentage under that. Okay. The seller is contributing to the buyer's broker compensation in that paragraph. Example, we're on page 7. We're at the top of page 7 now, Leah. All right. This is the new location for you to write in and negotiate your broker compensation. Remember, it is the broker's compensation. I know we all say my compensation. It is not your compensation. You get compensated from the broker. When I say you, I mean the AEA. Okay. You have your buyer's representation agreement that says your buyer's going to pay the 3%, right? So this is where you're going to tell your buyer doing your buyer consult, hey, I'm going to always negotiate for our broker to get compensated from the seller. We used to say, I'm going to negotiate for the other broker to compensate our broker's compensation. There's no more broker paying broker to broker. It's the seller paying our broker. So make sure when you're having those listing appointments that you are talking to your seller in those terms. Okay? Because the seller that you're representing is now going to be obligated through the 1 to 4 to pay the other broker's compensation. Used to before in our listing agreements, we would put 6%, 3% to our broker, and 3% to the procuring buyer's broker. The listing agreements have changed. So now the listing agreement only obligates the seller to pay our broker compensation, our broker 3% listing compensation. However, you still need to be having a conversation with the seller to say, hey, Mr. Seller, you're signing this listing agreement with our brokerage, and you are obligating yourself to pay our brokerage 3%. However, you are not going to be obligated to pay the other broker's compensation. You're only going to be obligated to pay it through the 1 to 4 and not the listing agreement, because AEA can no longer pay the other 3%. Okay? Did y'all understand that?
So is the net that now it's 3% or a minimum 3%?
You're still having the same conversations with the seller.
Right.
Right? You're just having a different conversation. 3% is going to be paid to AEA through the listing agreement. The other 3% is going to be paid to the procuring buyer broker through the 1 to 4.
Right, which in this case, it's not my issue, right? Because I'm representing the buyer here, right? Or the seller.
Mhm.
Either way, we're only responsible for the 3% that we're representing. To explain that. Is that an accurate statement?
No. Because you still want to represent your seller. Yes, it is our problem because we want the seller to clearly understand that it is still 6%. We don't want the seller to think that they only have to pay the 3% to us as the listing broker. Just let them know you're paying the 3% to the listing broker through our listing agreement, and you're going to pay the 3% to the buyer broker through the 1 to 4. Okay? Y'all got it? Okay.
The listing, I just want to be clear on the listing agreement though. So just put 3%.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, cool.
That's it.
Let me make sure. I just got.
Don't put
Don't
6%,
bring any more.
because then we'll have to do an amendment because the
Yeah.
seller's not paying AEA 6%.
Right.
They're paying us 3%.
Okay. Just
Right.
make-
Yep, that's it. Right?
Thank you.
Paragraph 12B this is very complicated. So I made me some notes and I'm gonna try to explain it to you as thoroughly and as clearly as I can. So paragraph 12B2 is buyer contribution to the seller's broker compensation. Okay. So 2 years ago, when they changed all of this compensation where we couldn't disclose it on the MLS, it's a big secret on if you're going to get paid or not. And then they put it in paragraph 12. There was enough case law to make this change where buyers wanted a house bad enough that they would say, I, as the buyer, will pay the sellers or a portion of the seller's compensation to make the deal work. And I don't know if you guys had enough experience with other agents that would say, well, the seller would take your offer, but they're only going to pay 2%. Or the seller's going to take your offer, but they're only going to pay 2.5%. Right? And then the buyer would, or we can't make this work if you want, blah, blah, blah. So there were buyers out there that were like, okay, well, I can pay your compensation to make this deal work. So you're only going to check 12B2 if your buyer is going to pay the seller broker compensation or any part of it. Okay?
Sounds confusing because it almost sounds like it's paying the listing agent commission. Like that's kind of her brokerage. That's kind of how it sounds.
That is what it is. It's not kind of. It is what it says.
If they want.
It allows the buyer to contribute towards the compensation that the seller has agreed to pay the listing broker. That's basically what that paragraph says. So an example, the listing agreement, the seller agreed to pay the listing broker $12,000. Okay. Offer terms, the buyer agrees to contribute $2,000 towards that seller broker compensation. Result, the buyer contributes $2,000 and the seller's obligation to that listing broker is decreased. Okay?
Sorry about that.
The reason why, and Cindy explained this to me, the reason why that little paragraph was added to the 12B was, she says it created the flexibility for negotiations between the buyer and the listing broker, right? Because if the seller was taking into consideration the full offer of what the buyer was offering and it was affecting his bottom line, then there was a way for the buyer. TREC just figured out a way for the buyers to contribute to make the deal work. Ultimately, it's up to the buyer on whether they can or they can't. But obviously, there was enough of this going on because trust me, any changes that come about the 1 to 4, it's because it's happened a lot of times. And the lawyer committee board is like, okay, there's enough case law. We need to make a change to the 1 to 4. Okay.
So is the buyer's brokerage gonna get?
Yeah. So this would be an instance where all 3 boxes are checked. You're asking for $5,000 in compensation, right? You're asking the seller to pay you as the buyer's agent 3%, and the buyer is willing to pay $2,000 of the seller's compensation to make the deal work. The buyer's not obligated to pay our 3% anymore when the seller agrees to pay the 3%. This is nothing more than a negotiation tool. Okay. So you as the buyer's agent, you're writing an offer. Okay. And you're going to ask for $5,000 in closing costs. Help.
I get the part, because that 1281B, I get that part, but it's the broker compensation part.
So paragraph 12, we ask for $5,000 in concessions. You have 12A and 12B. 12A is our brokerage compensation. We ask for 3%. The seller is paying this. The seller has agreed to pay our 3%. Right? Now, the buyer, because in your buyer's rep, it says your buyer's going to pay you if the seller does not agree. Right? In this case, the seller agreed to pay for our 3%. Seller listing agent comes back and says, my seller is willing to pay your brokerage 3%. But he's also asking the buyer to pay $2,000 to my brokerage. This is the listing brokerage. The buyer isn't paying your 3%. So now you got to go back to your buyer and say, hey, seller has come back and said they're going to give you $5,000 in concessions. They're going to pay my brokerage 3%, but the seller is asking for the buyer, for you to pay $2,000 to the listing brokerage. Can you do that? You're going to get on the phone, you're going to call the buyer's lender, and you're going to say, hey, here's the scenario. Can the buyer contribute $2,000 to the listing agent's compensation? And the lender's going to say, yeah. And so then you're going to check all 3 boxes. That's the scenario.
Why would seller ask for that?
Because he's already agreed to pay 3%. You want this to happen. You're getting your 3% from the broker.
Like, it's 12 feet.
It's just a negotiation.
So if the seller just, like for 12A, let's say that it's 2%, they say, hey, it's a 2%, and on your buyer rep, you have 3%. Is that where you're like, hey, you have that tough conversation with the buyer, like, hey, you're gonna have to come up with 1%, or do you, or is that?
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation.
Right.
That
Okay.
doesn't have anything to do with this.
Not with that, right?
Yeah, but so yeah, if the seller agreed to the 2% here, you have a buyer rep that says 3%.
Yeah.
So you can go back to the buyer to pay your other 1%. You're still confused, Christine?
I'm just trying to understand.
I'm a little confused too. The concession will be on the 12 or,
The first page.
Page 6 of the contract.
yeah, so on the amount not to exceed, correct?
12A1B.
Yeah, 12A1 is seller concession.
Concession, right?
Yeah,
And then,
and 12B1 and 2.
right.
This is
I get that.
B, this is, I'm sorry, this is 12B. This is number 1. This is number 2. Okay. So I will read, it says to create flexibility in negotiations and accurately disclose compensation agreements when a buyer is willing to help bridge a gap in a transaction. TREC specifically revised the form to better align with current industry compensation practices. This also came into why they added this 12B1 and 2 was, I don't know if y'all ever wrote an offer or were in a situation where the lender says, I need to see your buyer's representation agreement, or a builder that says, I need to see your buyer's representation agreement.
I've heard about that.
Okay, this is why. Because when it was clearly disclosed in the MLS who was paying what, it didn't matter. Right? And so now with this, it shows the lender and the title company clear compensation of who's paying what. So they no longer have to ask for those documents. That's why it was added.
But couldn't you just, 12A or the first part, couldn't you just put 3,000 and then not use the 12.2 or 12B?
No. No. So understanding that the first paragraph, the concessions, the 5,000, that is what the seller is given the buyer credit for their closing costs. right?
Okay.
It's totally
I got
different
you.
from the
Okay.
compensation,
Yes, okay,
okay?
okay, that, okay.
Trust me, it's gonna take a while to sink in, especially if this is the first time you're hearing it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm.
There's been like these last changes that came down in the contract are very,
I guess I'm just trying to understand why the seller would ask the buyer, hey, for paragraph B2. Like, I'm trying to understand a sentence.
it's simple. It comes down to his bottom line. He's willing to pay the buyer broker compensation in exchange of the buyer paying maybe a difference to his listing compensation. And still wanting to make the deal work. Now, can you counteract that? Can you counter negotiate that so that it works out for your buyer? Absolutely. But here's the thing. When those changes came down it was always in the buyer representation. That never changed. One thing that if you haven't noticed, shame on you, but what you should have noticed, that one thing that has never changed when all of these contract changes came down 2 years ago to even right now is the buyer representation agreement. The buyer was always obligated to pay our 3%, as was the seller in the listing agreement. Nothing changed there. The only thing that changed was the way the verbiage so that we could get paid. We were already having these conversations. What they've done is just come down to make sure that, hey, you better be practicing and saying what you're having your clients write. And I'm guilty. I was not having those valuable conversations to let them know it was already always in black and white that the seller was going to pay 6%. It's always been in black and white that the buyer was going to pay my 3% if the seller didn't. It's just back then, the seller was always going to do it until the changes came down 2 years ago. And the change was how we disclosed it, not how it was interpreted. And that's the huge difference. So now we have all these changes and we're like, what the heck? Now I got to really make sure they understand, which makes for an uncomfortable conversation if you weren't used to having those conversations in the very beginning. All right, we're almost to the finish line, guys. 3 more pages. Page 8 of the contract, paragraph 20. Seller and buyer, they added under paragraph 20, they added paragraph B. Seller and buyer shall promptly execute and deliver any statements, documents, and information requested by escrow agent, who is also the title company, required by governmental reporting requirements, for example, reporting to the U.S. Treasury or its bureaus. The title company is going to request those documents. So you might as well prepare your buyers up front, especially if they're a foreign person, right? And understanding those documents. Under paragraph 21, notices. You just noticed that the layout changed a little bit. I will, if a contract comes through for compliance, buyer and seller information should and shall be under paragraph 21. And I always get the question, well, we're not representing the seller, we're only representing the buyer. How am I going to get the seller information? How do you think you're going to get it? Pick up the phone, call the listing agent. Hey, Christine, I'm writing an offer on your 123 Main Street. I would love for you to share your seller's information with me, either email or mailing address or phone number, one or the other, because I would hate for your client to not get properly noticed in the event something arises in the contract and the title company doesn't have your client's information. Now, is the title company doing what they need to do to get that information? Absolutely. But call the listing agent and ask them for the information and just put it in there. Okay? Do not forget to put your email or the other agent's email at the bottom either. Paragraph 22. I love this portion of the new contract because everything is grouped together. It is clear on the addenda. And they're logically arranged, right? Better for me for compliance, for sure. Checking the boxes that apply, right? Making sure that you check what applies. If there's a non-realty addendum, if there's a propane, the third-party financing, if there's any leases, checking those. And then under other, they put the HOA, the non-realty, the backup, and the oil and gas there. Notice the bold. Seller's failure to provide applicable statutory disclosures and notices may provide buyer with remedies or rights to terminate the contract. If an addenda applies, make sure you get it at the onset of writing the offer. And if an addenda applies for a listing that you take, make sure you get it at the onset of taking the listing. Page 11, the broker contact information. I love this because now if it's an intermediary, it's at the bottom. And then the broker, the seller and the buyer broker information. We're done. With 10 minutes to spare. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead. Anybody in Zoom land have any questions on the contract?
Not at the moment.
Yeah, same, not at the moment, but when I run through the, when I cross that bridge, I'll ask questions.
Yes, please ask them. Don't be afraid to ask, because I promise if you have a question, somebody else has the same question as well. Okay. Christine has some questions on the listing agreement we're going to go over. You want to stay on and listen. It's a lot. Did y'all learn something today?
Yes.
Absolutely, learned a lot today, and I will learn more once I start exercising these contracts and getting into it.
You will learn more, Ozan.
I'm looking forward to it.
Mike, this is your second time to take contracts. Did you learn something new? You can't hear.
Maybe he's talking, but he doesn't know he's on mute.
We can see the little microphone moving.
Oh, it's
So the seller's authorization to disclose and advertise certain information. Paragraph 8, the seller authorizes broker to disclose to other brokers and prospective buyers that seller will consider contributing amount up to towards buyer's expenses. Buyer may use these funds to pay for buyer's broker's fees or other expenses payable by buyer under a sales contract. So would this be aside from, so like, I'm gonna word it correctly.
What's your question?
I guess. So if this would be disclosed in the MLS, right? Like if there's something in here, I have to put it in the MLS, correct? Or no? Only if they ask. So like it says towards buyer expensive, so the seller, yeah.
Okay, so there is a portion in the MLS that says seller is willing to contribute up to, you can put that in the MLS.
So then when a contract comes through and they complete paragraph 12A, sellers,
May contribute up to 2,000.
no. That the seller, the buyer's $5,000, so the seller's contribution would go there. Then the buyer's agent's gonna ask for 3% on top of that as well. So I need to let my seller know, like, yes, you will contribute up to that amount, but the agent's still gonna come back and say, well, you pay for my commission, buyer's agent's commission, right? 3% in addition to that.
So the better of the conversation to have with your client is to say, hey, Mr. Seller, you are agreeing to pay up to $5,000 in buyer concession. And there is a possibility that the buyer's agent may also ask for 3% for their broker compensation. Everything is negotiable. Just because you are agreeing right now in this very moment to contribute up to $5,000 is not obligating you to do anything. Everything is negotiable.
And then as far as paragraph B, seller authorizes broker at broker's discretion to disclose and advertise the following information concerning the property to prospective buyers and other brokers. And it says, like, for example, insert information regarding seller's reasons for placing the property on the market, condition of sale, phrases such as terms and offers. Would this information be put in the public or private record?
Public. So like motivated seller will look at all offers, bring us an offer, seller will entertain any offer. Whatever verbiage you are planning to put in those public remarks, make sure it's on that form. Is it a broker required form? No.
Well,
But
it's
if you want it-
required for the paragraph of the listing agreement. It tells you to use this one if you're gonna select yes.
Yes, but it's not required.
It's not-
If you check it, then you must use it.
Yeah.
But if you don't check it, it's not required. Right?
Correct.
So it's listing agent discretion. So we have some agents that use it. We have some agents that don't. You're not required to use it unless you check that box in the listing
And
agreement.
then, of course, if we don't use it and goes to compliance, you're gonna reject it or it then because that box is checked yes.
I won't reject it. I'll just say, hey, you checked this box. Where's this document? Just get it signed by the seller. There's something I was going to say to your question too, Christine, and I lost my train of thought. Oh, this is another reason why, so you're an independent agent before you make the listing go live, and you may already do this, before you put the listing live, send it to the seller in the incomplete status and have them look at everything in an email and saying, here's your listing that's about to go live. Please look. Bye, Tanya. Thank you for coming. No, you're good. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I actually learned a lot.
Yes. Yes, thank you. You know, sending them that in an email saying, could you please review, and give them the private remarks and the agent sheet, and having them approve it. Because in the event you do miss something, like you don't get that form signed, and then they come back and say, I didn't tell you to say I was a motivated seller. Yes, you did. I sent you this, you approved it. And so, you know, because things happen, we're human, we miss things, but always making sure that the seller approves your listing before it goes live. Okay.
Okay. I've done that in the past.
Yeah.
Even if I miss something, it'll be like,
Yes, exactly. So it's always best to have them as involved as you can, right? Any other questions?
the representation disclosure, that one's required.
That is a broker required.
I
Yeah.
saw that, because I need to get my clients to sign this.
Yes. That one is required. All right. Well, y'all go be great. Have a great weekend. Save all your documents, and I teach this one.
Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, next
Thank
month,
you.
Guys, thank you, Mike.
this is last week of the month, next month too.
Yeah. The last full week, right? Ozzy?
Oh, boot camp? Yeah. That starts on, the 17th.